So this is the podcast for now. And what we're doing, this is experimental. This is just to actually start this off a little bit, if you will. This is just to get, to warm things up a little bit. It's been a while since I've done any sort of podcast stuff. Haven't distributed a lot of podcast stuff in the past. So we're trying to create some brand familiarity with Dinky Tehc, the Dinky Tehc brokerage, promoting fostering animals, from animal shelters to just sort of look out for them on an ongoing basis. And yeah, doing a whole lot of content in that sense. And then so beyond that, we're going to try to make some sounds live and then post them either to distribute them on some of the online sound stores like iTunes or things like that during these podcasts. So this is just to sort of warm up, develop a little context. I also have an external battery to plug things in to keep this lasting a little longer. But this might just be a little experimental, sort of a short one for that reason. A little short podcast just to send something out there as sort of like a framework to establish for more future episodes, if you will, because we want to have a little bit of a backdrop of some, this is primarily about spiritual finance as the speaking, and then the sounds are primarily electronic rock, I guess you could call it, or electronic ambient, and then just some random vocals mixed in. So we're just going to sort of throw things around. That's actually the purpose of the podcast, and doing this type of content on a more regular, more consistent basis, is to have the podcast being documenting the things that are going on that we're doing, making sound, or and then talking about things during things happening also in the periphery is sort of it's behind the scenes talking about something while doing something else. That's sort of the essence of hoping to try to do this, making sound. And it's you're baking cookies, if you're baking cookies, you can also have a podcast, basically. So making sound is, for example, making maybe a video on the side, sound on one side, and then making a video on the other side for the sound is also something that could be done during a podcast, for example. So that's sort of the preface, is maybe doing both of those things, an edited video or whatever on the side while podcasting on the side. Baking cookies is, the analogy for doing the video on the side that's edited, while this one is unedited. So it's just sort of more of a stream, a podcast. I'm collaborating with an audience that typically does not exist on these YouTube live situations. But hopefully afterwards, somehow we'll recontextualize some of this content into podcast land. And then we'll have a mixture of some different content, and then we're being kept company with the podcasting situation in the background, and therefore if people watch it later, then it's they're keeping me company in the present, in the future, as opposed to the present, or it would be the past in the future. So that's good, and therefore it's you're keeping me company in the future, even though at the present time there's no company being kept while doing some of these podcast making of sounds or videos or whatever in the background, and also podcasting stuff. It's talking to open air. There's no audience, in other words, in the meantime, even though this is a live broadcast onto YouTube. Since it's the beginning of a lot of these types of things, there's a kind of a lack of audience in the meantime. So yeah, that's how it is, starting with some stuff on YouTube. So anyway, that might be a good place to stop this one as sort of a foundational podcast, if you will. I was going to try to make some sounds right now, but there's actually not a whole lot of battery in this podcast phone, and then the second phone for sound also does not have a lot of battery, so therefore we would lose battery on one of them. If I started making sound, that would go out quick, and then this phone is losing juice as we speak, so it's probably going to end. So it's probably better that I end it before the battery runs out on it. So yeah, I mean, with that in mind, I could plug this battery in and try to have this talking aspect run a little bit more, but that kind of defeats the purpose of doing baking cookies in the background, which is the analogy of doing other things in the background to also contribute to the brand building, brand awareness, talking about the brokerage stuff, talking about brand strategy is also a big part of this whole jive, because it's like a very, a very foundational, I think, purpose to this podcast, as well as talking about brand strategy that's ideal in real time to conceptualize like what the brand strategies are being implemented, what are being focused on, what sorts of results are ideal from the cause of those sorts of effects, what's the purpose and the intention, and then how different collaborations can hopefully form, and that's so doing this type of podcast is definitely a part of, is trying to be a part of outreach for reaching out, conceptual sound collabs and things like that, making sound with some other people, videos in person, traveling and such, maybe Zoom videos that are interviews and such things that can spin into like sound making sessions like on those Zooms and things like that, and or shout outs from companies or causes such as, or people representing causes such as like fostering of shelter animals and more things of that nature, to just bring more of a gravitational rotation, if you will, to this whole Dinky Tehc process and distribution aspects and awareness of just like the energy sort of behind it, to try to bring it forward, to push more, momentum and sort of gravity together for sort of collaborative, sort of snowballing sort of collaborations where it's like it all sort of tries to connect somehow. Like there's like a movie which is a reference to me internally sometimes, that is by Morgan Spurlock, and I forgot the name of it, but it's like a movie that's sponsored by a bunch of different brands, and therefore all those brands are getting shouted out, and at the same time they paid for the movie. So that's kind of like a strategy type of vibe in of itself, like where if you just add collectively, like in essence more collective additions to the process, and in terms of also entails like sort of offloading some of the costs, and then also having more like fostering shelter animals type of mindsets, type of causes at the backside of a lot of focuses is definitely a big part of the goal of that Spurlock collaboration mindset, whether it's Zooms and like Zooms can be had by the right people, and then like at the end of the Zooms, like people are conceptually delegated tasks, and then conceptually a company is formed during those those Zooms where people are foundationally brought together based around a specific idea in the center place, and as a result there can be potential for just that to be activated through a Zoom that we host. It's just a conceptual type of collaboration, and then everybody is obviously a special part that makes that thing a whole thing, kind of like that Morgan Spurlock movie, because they all kind of added together to make the budget for that movie, and they all work together. And that's in essence the essence of Dinky Tehc, is trying to exemplify the specialness of all people, and being able to highlight those things, and develop different chemistry from those things by just mixing up and shaking up the world as though it was a snow globe, and then repurposing and recontextualizing energy that people have foundationally within them that's endless and connected to the universe and things like that, to be able to just recontextualize and repurpose the potential for all people based upon just whatever's latent that's inside people, that's often not known or acknowledged or necessarily identified based on distractions by human society as it is at the current time. just pre-existing distractions based on a program of the world in a momentum sense that causes endless distractions, and more by the day obviously unfold with more social media and more more items being tossed around for for like across the wall, across the board, in terms of conversation among people, and companies jumping in and seeking attention and such things to often for gain, to grow and gain and benefit as a organization, to grow in the monetary sense. And this, so we are trying to focus on the philanthropy sense for the most part, and in the large parts as to how philanthropy connects with business and how business is meant to be driven by philanthropy after all. And that's sort of the foundation for this sort of podcast and Dinky Tehc, and trying to create more foundational energy in unforeseen places, and develop, just kind of doing experiments, and even just having perpetual energy structures, so that it's reformation of potential human energy has just the ability to perpetually somehow realign, if you will, just based on sort of intention being aligned in sort of a better framework, if you will. And so that's sort of the goal and the backdrop. And so hopefully we can continue and persist, and hopefully this little podcast insert can find its way somewhere, perhaps just as an initial little onset, perhaps, or perhaps not. And we'll just sort of see how it goes, and try to keep spinning in content of this fashion, so to speak, and as consistent as possible, and just try to continue to hope that gravity can somehow grow and persist and spawn and spin and build a bit up. All right, thanks again. Have a good rest of the night or day, etc. Thanks. Cheers. Peace. Bye. Thank you. Bye.